Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Winfred, and I'm from Arkieva. Um, I think we can get started today on the webinar since it's almost a minute to the hour. As I said, my name is Winfred Amwako. I am the Growth Marketing Lead here at Arkieva, and I am going to be your moderator for today's Arkieva User Exchange discussion. My goal today is to make this discussion very collaborative, very interesting, and very exciting for us, even though things seem a little gloomy outside. My hope is that I paint a better picture for you all and also to give you some reassurance that things are going to get better at the end of the tunnel. But before we get started, I would like to mention that if at any point in time you have trouble hearing us, please let us know by using the chat feature in the GoToWebinar window, and we will be sure to assist you. Also, we will reserve a few minutes at the end of the meeting for questions. Please feel free to enter your questions as you think of them right now using GoToWebinar questions window. And we hope to take and we hope you can take a few minutes at the end of the meeting to complete our feedback survey so we can know we're doing a good job and also to know how we can get better. So for our discussion today, we will be touching on the topic of planning production scheduling around highly variable demand. Our focus will be on the impact of this ongoing pandemic, COVID-19, as well as the social unrest on supply chain networks. But before we get into the weeds for today's discussion, I would like to first introduce our distinguished panel of experts. Firstly, starting with Bo Blackstone. He is the Director of Supply Chain at State Industrial Products. Bo, could you please do us the honor of introducing yourself to the audience?
Sure, Winfred. Appreciate the kind introduction. Happy to be here today. I joined State Industrial Products roughly 3.5 years ago. As the slide notes, company's been around over 100 years, based out of the Cleveland area. We're on our 4th generation family owner. It's been kept in the same family. In a nutshell, what we do is we make cleaning chemicals. So any chemical to maintain a facility, prison, hospital, school, restaurant. We manufacture a wide variety of those chemicals outside Columbus, Ohio, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. Our model compared to our competitors is a little different. We don't ship full skids of product. We ship about 20,000 UPS boxes a month. So very much a service-oriented company, ship same day or next day. And we've obviously seen some impact from COVID and demand changes here lately that we'll get into in here a little bit. Thanks, Winfred.
Well, thank you so much, Bo, for the quick introduction. I would also like to move to the second presenter on the panel today, which is Joe Fasano. Joe is the Director of Fulfillment and Operations Excellence at SPI Pharma. Please introduce yourself, Joe. And tell us about your business as well.
Thank you very much, Winfred, and good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Joe Fasano. I've been with SPI Pharma for a little over 9 years now. A little bit about SPI Pharma. We strive to make a difference in the lives of patients, our customers and employees in the communities we serve. We are in the business of providing patient-centric, innovative solutions for global pharmaceutical and nutritional customers. We service over 55 countries in the manufacture and marketing of antacid active ingredients, excipient ingredients, which is the other stuff, the non-active ingredients in drug formulations, drug delivery systems. Helping to provide systems that are more patient-friendly, tablets that dissolve in your mouth as opposed to injections, etc. Taste masked actives, which is along the same line, where we take bitter active ingredients and we can taste mask those so that they can be swallowed or delivered in a dissolvable form. Vaccine adjuvants, finally, and we also provide drug development services with our team of experienced formulation scientists, where we help our customers to bring their active ingredients to the market with formulation expertise. Thank you very much.
Awesome. And finally, I would like to call on Sujit Singh, who is the CEO of Arkieva, to introduce himself to the audience as well.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Sujit Singh. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Arkieva. I've been here since for about 21 years. At Arkieva, we have one focus, which is helping our customers be successful through better supply chain planning. And in that sense, we help companies of different sizes in different areas, such as demand planning, inventory, supply planning, production planning, and scheduling. And we do this through multiple offices, couple here in North America, one in Europe, one in India, and also through partners of ours. And we do this for customers in a global way. We have customers pretty much on all continents. So that's a quick introduction for myself. Back to you, Winfred.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us today. So let me quickly walk their whole audience through what you should expect in our discussion for today. So first, we shall begin dissecting your supply chain into various components. Firstly, we would explore on why planning for demand in your supply chain is very important. And for the success of your bottom line, your business needs to make sure to deliver reliably to its customers, as well as to keep them very happy. Knowing that this is very crucial, we will touch on ways by which to optimize your demand planning framework. And after that, a hot topic that is on everyone's mind is that is really affecting everyone is COVID-19. This is something that is recent to us all, and so we would touch on how to plan for pre-post and as well as post COVID-19. Then we should take a turn towards supply chain planning. It is also very important to investigate how raw materials planning is. Planning is very important to your overall success. And finally, we will discuss the ways of managing or minimizing disruptions to your scheduling. And so with that in mind, I would like to first call on Sujit with a question. So another type of event that is impacting demand is a thing about social unrest. How would this affect supply chains networks during the black swan events like COVID-19? Could you help us out, Sujit, please?
Sure. Any any event of the scale that we are witnessing today, such as Corona, when it's compounded by the events, the social event that is going on, can have certainly will have impacts on demand, sometimes predictably, sometimes unpredictably. For example, there might be the predictable element of a short-term downtick or disruption. There might be unpredictable element of a longer-term downtick or change. There might be a question of the severity. There might be a question of certain things going up, certain things going down, especially when it comes to the two events going side by side. In some cases, one might negate the other. In some cases, it might have an additional effect or a compounding effect. And again, like in all things supply chain, it could be different based on the different product families, different products, different product categories, different business areas. So that's the overall impact coming in from having two events going on together. As to if we talk a little bit about the demand itself, not to put a very fine point, too fine a point on it, demand is head of the supply chain beast. It drives a lot of, if not all of the supply chain decisions in terms of what to make, where to make, how to hire, how to run the factory, whether it should be one shift, two shifts, three shifts. If we parse the news of late, we can see that certain companies have had to close shop because their demand has basically disappeared. Hopefully it's temporary. And certain companies have to go and hire a lot of people because their demand has increased quite a bit. So for example, the Amazon company has had to, extend their workforce, extend their working hours, extend their overall capability, because a lot of us are essentially relying on them to get the products to our doorstep, because none of us are stepping out and doing the shopping. Well, at least till a few weeks ago. It's being relaxed a little bit now. So demand is one of the key drivers, if not the main drivers, of all the supply chain decisions. And when we think of that in that perspective, think of demand in that as that lead decision area within the supply chain, or lead cause of decisions in the supply chain. Then we need to think about how to go about planning this demand. And it helps to put things into a demand framework or planning framework. Now today, Bo and Joe will talk quite a bit about how the changes in demand has impacted the operations. I'll just take a few minutes here to put this framework in place so that we can get a sense of how we can go about understanding our own demand. So first and foremost, any company that wants to get a handle on the demand planning, they need to identify the drivers for their particular demand. Very often, we see that companies rely primarily on the historical element of their demand. So in other words, looking at the history of what their demand has been like and projecting it out into the future. However, understanding other drivers can also be very helpful. For example, economic factors, the weather effects on it, maybe sometimes the geopolitical effects of events that are going on, the types of things we are seeing today. There might be some government regulations. Certainly some of that is in play right now. We might have to understand where we are in product life cycles, because depending on where it is in terms of the hype associated with that product, we might have a certain demand pattern, whereas certain other products which are closing the end of life, they might have a very different demand pattern. So it's helpful to do that. The other areas could include things like what else we ourselves are doing, or maybe our competition is doing. Are there promotions going on? Are there price discounts going on? Are there marketing campaigns that are going on? Now, these can be market-wide, this can be customer specific, these can be done in different ways. So it's important for a company to understand these drivers. And last but not the least, we have to think about, are our products going to be affected by unusually big orders, things like projects and tenders. For example, in the COVID environment, a company that was a supplier of a mask or a PPE could see a huge order come through because of the very extraordinary level of demand that exists in the marketplace. So identifying these drivers of your demand, it can be very helpful in managing your demand in an optimal way and planning for it in an optimal way. So how do we go about doing that? Once we have a notion of the driver, like a lot of things in life, it becomes a question of people, process, and technology. And when we talk about people, we are talking about people who are business knowledgeable, who are able and willing to participate in the process, who are collaborative, who can identify changes in the ground reality and provide input associated with that. Process-wise, we need to have a process of collecting the data, the appropriate data, the right level of data, the right kinds of data, putting it all together so that people can make decisions, have a system of checks and balances so that something obviously wrong doesn't escape and become the plan, that we have a way of catching it. And then finally, technology. And these days, technologies can be split up into analytics and predictive tools. Analytics could mean simply that we want to have technology that segments our data, that allows us to understand the data itself in many different ways. Where is the overall demand moving? Which are the heavy demand items? Which are the highly variable items? Which are the forecastable items? Which are essentially unforecastable items? And then a predictive part of the technology tool set could include things like mathematical formulations that take underlying data and project it out into the future as a time series. It could include things like engines that would look at external factors, where a government published indicator would be telling us that if this indicator goes up, then 3 months later our demand would go up as a result of it. So understanding and establishing that causality so that we can then use that data both internally as well as externally to go and do a statistical projection of where our demand is going to go. So within this framework, when we talk about looking at it in a monthly fashion, if we look at a span of an entire month, we might start the process with analysis, where we are getting the history, we are analyzing it, we are segmenting it, we are trying to put these things into hopefully some neat buckets. We might then, as a next step, optimize our statistical or the mathematical forecast. There could be a lot of different techniques around different methodologies, how to pick the best methods. There might be techniques around utilizing machine learning and advanced, as well as artificial intelligence type of tools in figuring out which methods to pick, at what levels to run the forecast. That then could be followed by a collaboration step, where we might then turn this mathematical output to people who are in the field, who are talking to the customers, who have knowledge of very current events, and who might then provide input, validate the output against some external information available, also create some kind of consensus, because it has been said that the average of multiple inputs, as long as they are independent, can improve the quality of any prediction. So it's very, very important to think along the lines of creating consensus, comparing scenarios, creating scenarios, because any prediction is inherently has some error in it. So understanding what kind of scenarios might play out might be very, very helpful for people. And then, of course, collaboration and participation creates accountability. If I have done the forecast, then I will feel accountable towards it. I might not have the same feeling if it was mathematically generated. So mathematically, as well as from human input, we come to a final number. And then as we close out the month, we have to think about, how has that performed with respect to the actuals? How accurate has it been? Is there any inherent bias that we see? Do we see that numbers are trending generally? We are forecasting too high, too low? And where are the value added steps in our process? Is it the math that is adding the value? Is it the people that are adding the value? Is it both? Who's adding more? Who's adding less? Are there certain segments where math adds value? Are there certain other segments where people add value? All that type of analysis can then lead to feedback, which can then lead into continuous improvement, which then hopefully allows us to then further optimize this framework on a monthly basis. All right, so now we will turn this over to Bo. And Bo, maybe a very brief question here is, how have, as you talk about it, are you seeing a lot of highs and lows in your demand compared to what you usually see as you're going through the current scenario here?
Yeah, thank you, Sujit. I would certainly say yes. So if you look at the next slide, there's kind of three points here as we think about what's going on with your forecasts. And certainly you built the foundation on what makes a good demand planning process. But I think one thing for everyone to keep in mind is, your forecasts are going to be in constant flux, essentially. So if you've got demand planners, show them some grace. Things are going to be all over the place. They're not going to be able to pinpoint exactly where things are going. I think a lot of us can argue that based off of all the statistics we're seeing out there on COVID infection rates and all those things, and where's the apex of the curve going to be, and all those things. And that's certainly translated into our demand. So when you're trying to project out to the future, your forecasts are going to be too low until they're too high. You're going to be hitting an apex at some point, and that's going to be hard to determine. So I think just maybe some practical ways to work through that is, if you've got stocked products, for state industrial, vast majority of our products are stocked. It's important to get the sales organization involved in allocating some of those sooner rather than later. You more than likely will get a tsunami of orders, and making sure that the right customers are getting the product and the right amount is a sales-driven conversation. And so those things, as a demand planner, that would be something that they could work with the sales organization to build that process if it hasn't been implemented before. If you have make-to-order products, again, some of those may see an increase. If you're following your normal process, you're going to accommodate those orders as they come in. One thing we noticed on some of those kinds of products is the demand levels were at such elevated levels that there were some delays with the credit and finance departments on making sure that customer had credit allocated, which once that's done, releases the order for us. So just on the forecasts that are climbing, some practical tips. On the inverse, yeah, demand is going to drop in areas as well, and your forecast is going to be too high until it's too low. Where's that trough going to be? When is it going to start to increase? Is it going to be the infamous V-shaped recovery that everyone's talking about, or is it going to be more of a gradual increase? Again, thinking about your types of products, make to order, again, you don't get the order, you don't have to worry about it. If it's a stock product, however, I think one thing to consider is you may end up getting overstocked if you're not adjusting your forecast down fast enough. You may be continuing to produce to forecast, and that forecast is no longer valid. In particular, you should be sensitive to products that have short expiration. So we have a handful of products that have I'll say a relatively short expiration in months rather than years, and it's just something to be cognizant of if that impacts your business or not. On the next two slides, just kind of visually illustrating these two increases and decreases. Here's an example of an increase we experienced. Blue bars being sales. You can see the final demand plan as we've been trying to approximate where the sales would be going. And you can obviously see the statistical forecast is reacting. More on that a little bit later. But very much so, 4-time volume increase in demand kind of from February to March is what we witnessed for certain segments of our business. The next slide really just shows an example of a business that had a decline where we lost about half of our business from month to month. Again, that was more of a lag, so that drop was not until April. But again, it's been one of those things where you can see we're trying to anticipate that decline for the future months, and when is it going to bounce back? Will it bounce back above normal levels or not? I think we'll cover some of these topics in a little bit more detail. Thanks, Winfred. Sujit.
Cool. So to summarize what both said, so forecasting system will be in constant flux, and demand planners will be constantly playing catch up. And so for stocks where demand is too high, we should allocate products as soon as possible and also involve sales in it. As well as for stocks that are too low, we should be cognizant of products with expiration date as well. So my next question to you, Joe, is considering the new realities that we face, how do you make good decisions without being influenced by past data?
Win, that's a great question. I believe we must first go back to the drivers that Sujit spoke about and identify the most critical factors, and in a consensus fashion within the organizations we're in. Review of the past data with a new lens, and remember, consider all the sources, the internal, the external, and the human sources. So for example, in periods of low demand, Are there other products that may have a higher demand that we can shift our capacity to? Agility is something that I'm going to speak to over the next couple of slides, and it's important to be agile in these situations. Can we reduce capacity? Did we have overtime scheduled that we can, take off? Can we reduce and run fewer shifts? Is there preventive maintenance work or capital repair work that can be pulled in from a future period? I know that's something that in a few of our work centers and suites that we took advantage of. Another example would be required training. There's statutory training that we're all required to do. It's a great opportunity with less things to do to get that training out of the way or other training that we had planned. It's a good time to consider lean or CI programs or events, Kaizens. I mean, these are things that'll pay dividends when the market picks back up again. And don't forget the holistic demand planning that we talk about. Collaboration is critical with customers. Get on the phone, talk to customers, seek out opportunities, this way that you can react as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. In this example, we show the normal demand curve, with a good normal basis and a predictive forecast. So during the crisis, it's important that we consider other factors in addition to the factors that this demand is built upon. Remember, these forecasts were based on a different historical data set, and even the qualitative decisions that went into finalizing this forecast are now different. Those were made on a different basis. So some things you might want to reconsider are, are there logistics concerns that are going to impact your demand? Will your customers be impacted? For example, in the crisis, were they classified as essential or did they shut down? One thing, we have a lot of overseas sales, and customer solvency is a consideration. For example, many of our foreign customers pay through letters of credit or bank contracts. And in one example, our customers in Bangladesh, the banks were only open for 2 hours a day if they were open. That slowed down trade, that affected our demand, and we had to consider that when looking at what we were manufacturing and what that means to future time periods. Some of our customers, I'm sure like some of all of yours, have focused on other products as they either pivoted to opportunities or in their business continuity plans in the crisis, they focused only on their key products that manufactured, and maybe your product wasn't a key product for that. Next slide, please. So when the dust settles, it's important that we adjust our sales history. We enter demand overrides and align with the new normal, because the statistics are going to be skewed for some time to come. So recapping on the crisis, be careful to solely rely on forecast. Again, I emphasize the close collaboration with customers. Pick up the phone. You think about how things were for many of us in the supply chain during the crisis. We were potentially overwhelmed with emails, both internally trying to understand the situation and externally. And we were sending emails to our customers, but get back to the basics. Get on the phone with them, try and collaborate with them and understand the impacts to them. And utilize your sales organization to do a lot of that, to engage in those activities. As demand is coming in, is it below normal? Is it above normal? Do we need to react? Consider cross-functional consensus to supply chain and sales and marketing. Adapt an agile philosophy, and communication is critical at the time. After the crisis, there's a new normal. Will sales return back to normal and to previous levels? Will there be a dip like you see in this slide? For example, this is a good example of a product that has seen a surge in demand followed by a corresponding trough. This might be a good example for toilet paper sales, for example. I'd postulate that demand remained the same during the crisis for toilet paper. However, buying habits changed, and at some point, excess inventory throughout the supply chain will need to be consumed, and there will be a corresponding trough. And it's important as demand planners that we remain vigilant and we stay ahead of those long-term changes. Consider the disruption on your supply chain. lower cost suppliers may have entered the market. Think about face shields, gloves, and mask supply. You know, these new players came in, they brought innovation, they may stay. Your customers pursued other products and may have rationalized your products over the period as they pivot into other areas. And finally, the reception will potentially have an impact. So the key point is it may be necessary to override your statistical forecast. You may need to constrain it where demand saw an increase, or you may need to adjust it, like in Bo's example that he showed, to show where you think the demand may be going. Thank you.
So Joe, I have a question for you here. What happens where your customers are fully disrupted with other products or factors?
Again, as I mentioned, I think it's critical to assume and maintain that agile posture, both in assessing and reacting to the demand. And we talked a little bit about that. And I think Bo next will delve a little bit more deeply into how you do that on the supply side.
Got it. So essentially, the key word here is collaboration. Collaboration is critical, and also communication is critical in order for us to be successful. So so to this fact, I would also like to bring in Bo to this discussion. Bo, how would you manage the purchasing side of your supply chain, as well as how could you partner with your suppliers who may also be affected by COVID-19?
Yeah, so when I think about supply planning, you know, there's kind of two buckets here. I think about stuff I'm procuring, bringing in. I'm also thinking about the stuff that I'm producing and scheduling myself. So if I kind of start here first on just general themes on the next slide, just some more practical things, thinking about supply planning overall before jumping into the supplier question you posed. If you're having a supply planning process, right, you're going to have an SOP meeting or some kind of meetings in your organization. Those may currently be monthly meetings, quarterly meetings. You know, you have some cadence that makes sense. In kind of the COVID type black swan event, you might want to change the cadence of those to be weekly or daily meetings. You may take a hour and a half long meeting that you have once per month, and you know, a short meeting every day might do wonders. So for example, for us, we start every day with a quick 10-15 minute phone call. We have stakeholders from various places in the organization, and you know, we're really just trying to gather quick updates and make sure communication is clear, and kind of build off what Joe said, just making sure you're communicating and communicating often is kind of the point of having meetings more frequently, but short value adding meetings. If you're using different modeling tools, make sure that you're adjusting your capacity hours. So, you know, our planning department went through and we were running lines longer. You need to make sure that your tools are seeing those extra hours available to them so they can obviously assist you. And then lastly, you might want to think about utilizing some of these kinds of tools and processes outside of what you would normally have a capacity constraint on. So you might have been planning with capacity constraints on production work centers. You may have constraints on warehouse space or loading docks. Think about ways you can try to manage that capacity as well. So on the next slide, we're going to start diving into the procured materials. So if you're looking at your raw materials, your delivery dates are going to be missed more than likely for inbound raw materials. It's important to have frequent communication with procurement and purchasing. It's even more important to keep those dates as accurate as possible in your ERP system, whatever tools you're using, because folks are going to be using those dates to plan when they're going to start runs, et cetera. So those dates are going to be constant flex, but again, constant communication with your suppliers is important to just ask for updates when maybe that's not a process that you would have to do in the past. Another practical tip is extend your lead times in your system for future purchase orders. You know, you may have vendors' lead times that are slipping because they've had a surge in demand as well. Try to plan for that as best you can. So for instance, a practical thing we did, we would normally look out for what's called a release date in the system. And basically that tells you when you need to cut your purchase order to get it in time based on your vendor's lead time and demand signals. We would look out 2 weeks for release dates. We changed that to looking out 6 weeks. We ratcheted that back over time, but that essentially allowed us to place our purchase orders 4 weeks earlier than we normally would, which again, we saw as important to get our place in line with suppliers that were having increased lead times. And then again, kind of touched on previously, but storage constraints may be an issue. Packaging, for example, it takes up a lot of space. You need to be aware that if you're bringing in a lot of packaging, the system may say you have it in your facility, but perhaps it's being stored off-site. Make sure you're planning for that if there's an extra day to bring it on-site. We had some package sizes that had an increase from 20,000 units a month to 200,000 units a month. And so that's a lot of bulky packaging that we've got to manage the storage of. Next slide. So thinking about managing those relationships with your suppliers, I think it's important to make sure that you're considering all options. So, we had a comment earlier about new players have entered the market for face shields and sanitizer and things like that. Challenge procurement, to look for other sources. They may have a Rolodex of people that are outdated. Challenge them to find new sources. If you have products that are regulated or under some kind of governing body for whatever geography you're in, those regulations may have changed temporarily. So, for instance, in the U.S., we've seen that with hand sanitizer. Alcohol-based hand sanitizer is now being relaxed on who could produce that. That may provide some additional supply options for you as well. And then kind of the last comment here is, again, thinking about your demand drops. You may not need some raw materials anymore. However, before you necessarily cancel or push out those POs, it's important to consider if there's a strategic decision at play. So for us, there were certain suppliers that weren't in high, they were supplying products that were not in high demand, but we had some hesitation that they may get shut down to a COVID outbreak at their facility, for instance. So we were very proactive on placing some strategic POs to bring materials in that necessarily weren't to demand, but were really to protect our customers in case a supplier went down. And then kind of the last comment here on managing our relationships with our suppliers on the next slide, just some practical tips that we found value in was you may have some sourcing procurement professionals that may not be at the site. They may have different career tenures. You may have some plant personnel at your manufacturing facilities that have been around for many, many years that are aware of suppliers that were used in the past but are no longer used. They may be right down the street. Try to encourage different folks in the procurement organization to tap into those resources. They're out there. And in a situation like COVID, you turn over every stone. And then kind of the last point I'll make is find ways to collaborate and partner. You may have suppliers that are hurting for certain things that you can assist them with. Try to partner with them, build that relationship, even if it's not to your own instant benefit. So, we had secured a very strong position on some packaging, and we sold some of that to a supplier that would not be used for our products, simply because we felt like it was the right thing to do to help them out because they were helping us out in other aspects of supply. And then also, again, for us, we supply disinfectants. So some of our suppliers, were having challenges sourcing disinfectants for their new procedures in their facilities. And we were certainly happy to lend a hand and send them some disinfectants for their facilities as well. So I jump in kind of the next section here, Winfred, on scheduling.
Thank you so much, Bo. So what about the situation where you're running out of capacity? What are some of the ways that you can manage that?
Sure. So if you jump into the next slide, I think the operative thought process here is, how can you manage these disruptions? So you've had a lot of variability injected into your demand picture. How can you minimize that in other aspects of your supply chain? So, I'm going to share some techniques our planning department implemented here in very short order that really benefited us. And the thrust of it was around our frozen zones. So for folks that are familiar with that, It's really a place where your production schedule is, you want it to be stable for a wide variety of reasons. And if you're using tools and systems, you want to reduce your frozen zones so the system can help you and propose things, and especially in a dynamic environment outside of that frozen zone. Leverage the tools, let them do what they do well. So, you know, we've normally had frozen zones of about 2 weeks, and that's worked well in normal business. However, one thing that we did was we extended frozen zones on products that we deemed as most critical. And it might sound a little counterintuitive, but for us, it was really to lock in that capacity, if you will, to run those most important products, and then allow the tools to come in and feather in production for the non-critical products around it. And that allowed us to, again, keep our focus on what was most important and not completely drop the ball on the other products that our customers needed as well. But then this also allows you to iterate. So you can lock in capacity for your most important products, and you can continue pushing on that and, you know, see where you hit your capacity limits. It certainly is a way you can, again, further iterate to see that you're not going to have unmet demand in other places of your business. But again, locking in that production, extending the frozen zone on some critical products, depending on your organization, ours very much considers a production order or a frozen production as much more certain, and folks use that in their processes different than a forecasted production. So purchasing, finance, folks in those organizations very much consider hard production, frozen production as more critical. And so that if you want to drive some of their behavior to support the operation, consider extending some of your frozen zones for some of your most critical products. Next slide. So, you know, if I think about, you know, managing your assumptions, you know, in the short term and the long term, you know, one thing that we did in terms of planning on the short term, you know, where can you get some low-hanging fruit? So capital projects are not it, right? It's where can you be more, have more synergies in your batches or your production runs. So on average, our batch sizes were doubled. We didn't need to really inject lots of extra mixing labor because we were just making double batches. So for us, that was, you know, a non-capacity constraint, if you will. However, when you get into the finished goods, you know, if you were running a monthly supply based on the past on your run sizes, make sure folks are updating and running as long as possible, you know, to avoid changeovers and downtime on those lines. Sometimes changeovers can be substantial depending on your business. Minimize those, extend your runs as long as possible. And then the last one is there may be some local tollers. You may be able to produce in a different location, kind of as Joe touched on. You may have capacity available in other places. Try to tap into that, convert some resources, and potentially convert some suppliers to toll products for you. Again, medium, long term, pretty straightforward. Do you have physical capacity? Do you have the correct equipment? Do you have the correct people? Generally, labor is a short-term adjustment you can make, but you know, in this environment, it's challenging to find qualified people before COVID, and then again, depending on where what geography you're in, if there are enhanced unemployment benefits from your government that are encouraging folks to, you know, stay home and reduce human density, it may be harder to find new bodies to come into your facility. And then again, kind of last point is you need to make sure your raw material suppliers can scale up to support you as well if you're seeing a long-term demand shift. So on the next slide, if I try to summarize, you know, being agile with some of these different points that Winfred and Joe have made, you know, you've got your base demand planning framework that Sujit laid out for us. You know, you want to identify those normal drivers, but you also want to, when you get into a situation like COVID or black swan events, you know, you're going to have variability injected that's not normal, that the past does not represent the future. You're going to need to go through and have, you know, your demand planners be very vigilant on your demand increases and demand decreases. You need to be more real time than what you may have been in the past. But then kind of key point, don't forget to adjust your history. If you're seeing a demand increase that's 4 times your normal level and it drops to a stable level of 2 times normal, you're going to want to make sure you account for that in your sales history by adjusting that. when you think about moving into supply planning with that demand picture, meet frequently, short meetings, little micro meetings, cut out all of the fluff, and really get the right stakeholders involved and make sure you're communicating often and frequently. And if you're using different tools, make sure you're updating those tools to affect any capacity constraints you have or any other things that your master data is kept as current as possible. Your raw materials are going to come in to support your production. Keep in constant communication with your sourcing procurement department, more so than you normally would. Again, master data, extend lead times in the system, or have folks pull things earlier, pull them in early. Things are going to come faster than what you anticipate. And again, kind of the last point here is when you apply that into scheduling, for your business, you should take a hard look at, are your frozen zones correct for the new situation? How should you adjust them? Where should you extend them? Where should you shorten them? Lock in what's most important. Let the other stuff feather in. Your business is going to make some important decisions. If you have limited capacity on what's the most important products, lock those in first. And again, lastly, just make sure you're collaborating with everybody else, purchasing, procurement, finance, and again, to help manage long-term expectations as well with capital and other things. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bo. So I would like to open up the pipelines for everyone to begin to input their questions into the chat window. So please keep them coming. One thing or a few things that stood out to me today is communication is really key. So communication, collaboration, participation, and accountability is very, very key if we have to be successful during this pandemic. Also, I just want to make sure that you guys got all the things that you wanted, or most of the things that you wanted from this webinar. So at the end of this webinar, please help us by filling up our survey that will be coming towards you. So please keep your questions coming in right now.
Bo, while others are thinking about the questions, maybe I'll ask one here verbally. With respect to the extra demand that you are seeing, what does that mean with respect to the lifestyle for the people? Does this mean that people are now having to stay in the or kind of isolated near the production facilities? Are they able to go back and forth? Are they having to run 2x longer shifts? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously tried to implement human social distancing as much as we can. We haven't put in any policies that are in that nature of requiring people to do certain things outside of the work hours. We're obviously very sensitive to, anyone bringing COVID into our facility and shutting down a shift. So there were some earlier conversations about trying to split shifts up, trying to reduce areas for folks, common gathering areas, break rooms and things like that. We certainly had some data points where some of our suppliers had a shift go down for 2 weeks. Due to an outbreak at their facility, and that impacts down the supply chain. So again, no really hard rules other than kind of what the guidance you've seen come formally from the CDC and whatnot. Just increased sanitization of the equipment, of people's hands, masks, social distancing. But
Right.
I would say for us, more draconian measures of forcing people to do certain things outside of work hours was not something that we felt like we needed to do at this time.
Okay, and maybe a follow-up is as the as the event kind of continues for a long period, do you have to take special steps to maintain the level of vigilance that you talk about? For example, when the event happens, everyone knows that this is a big change. The way you described how people are planning differently and behaving differently. As time goes on, does the organization have to take special steps to keep that level of vigilance, or how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's human nature, right? That habits become habits, and sometimes the attention to detail can not be as strong as it was at the beginning. So, for us, for example, just reinforcing those constantly, and kind of morning meetings, morning production meetings, making sure that you're covering your schedule, you're covering safety topics, making sure you're continuing to reiterate the social distancing, the personal hand care, those kinds of things. The masks, for example, there's lots of things talking about masks, and here in Ohio in particular, it's been advised that any business employee needs to wear a mask. Customers are optional, but employees need to wear a mask. There are certain exceptions to that have been updated, and in particular, when you start getting into hot weather in industrial facilities that aren't air conditioned, wearing a mask can impact somebody's ability to be well. And so those are some considerations that we've had to adapt to as we've moved into just kind of different seasons through this COVID outbreak.
Thank you, Bo. I see that other questions have come in, so I'll turn this back to Win.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sujit. So one question from Misty Eldridge from Escalade Sports is, in your micro S&OP meetings, what sort of topics or agenda do you have? What did you define as critical?
So for ours, it was, we had I'll call it a file brought to every meeting with what we designated as our A products and our B products, and then kind of all the tertiary products. And we had folks in those meetings from operations, product management, marketing, purchasing, planning, and it was really just to align on the most important products. How is supply coming along? Have there been updates and dates on POs, for example? When are we going to have more? Because the sales organization is, again, trying to reach out and communicate to customers on when to expect product. We had products that we temporarily stopped sale on in order to get through a backlog of orders, and again, trying to project when we can turn those products back on. We also discussed for some products making sure allocations are completed before product arrives. So if we have a material coming in from maybe a finished goods manufacturer, and it's going to come in next week, we want to make sure the sales organization is ready on releasing those orders to be fulfilled to the correct customers. And those kinds of things, we found a lot of value in kind of chatting every morning for 10 to 15 minutes. Probably eliminated a couple dozen emails that would come throughout that day anyway. So those were the general topics. It was very focused on inbound supply, when, updating dates, and making sure we're communicating those clearly to the whole team.
Awesome. So based upon what we've learned from the impact of the pandemic and the medical community warning us there may be a second wave this winter, are you doing anything to prep in case there's another wave?
I think that's the million-dollar question, right? Is what's this going to look like going forward? When there's a lot more intelligent people than myself that maybe have a better understanding of that, but for us, we're not going back to normal process, if you will, pre-COVID on what we would call our core products right now. So we're very much being very vigilant on those. In particular for us, there are regulated active ingredients for all of these disinfectants, making sure that we still have a very healthy supply situation on those and for the foreseeable future. So those are things where we're not canceling purchase orders because we've had a moderation of demand. We are very much thinking longer term on some of our supply situations We're still placing POs even longer for certain things that we normally wouldn't, and really just to try to get ahead of that potential fall surge if it comes. And quite frankly, some of our suppliers normally would have a month lead time. They're promising stuff now in October, and so really we're having to make some decisions of what we think the fall is going to look like today on some of our purchasing activities. So it's something we are anticipating something. What that is exactly, I would say we're still trying to figure that out, like a lot of other people.
So I'm sorry.
This is Joe. I was going to ask if I could jump in on that
Yes.
one as well.
Yes.
We keep using the words abundance of caution. So what we've done by site is, we have what we call a reopening plan for the non-essential people, the people on the sites that have been working from home very successfully, which is a learning that we do intend to incorporate into activities in the new normal. But we are not just jumping back to bringing everyone back to the office as soon as the guidelines are lifted. And here in Delaware, for example, where our corporate office is, we can now, after the 15th, bring 50% of the fire occupancy of the building back. But there's a couple of reasons for that. Things are working very smoothly. We are also waiting and seeing what's happening, considering all the events that are occurring around us. And at the same time, there are people that are anxious. So we don't want to force those people back into an environment where we think they're going to be less productive. So our crisis management team is still meeting, and we're still operating in a crisis mode, albeit an improving crisis mode.
So, Joe, do you also feel like your teams or employees have the right knowledge to make the right decision during COVID? Or did they reveal some gaps which can or will be tackled with training?
I think where I was touching on agility and communication, that's an area that we had to come up to speed very quickly on. It's very easy, to get all the IT systems working from home, but as many of you have seen, a lot of people, it's talking, and we're not necessarily seeing one another and interacting in the same fashions. So we have to go back, I think, and look a little bit more around some of our communication channels, some of the active listening, the employee, a lot of training, and we've really embraced Microsoft Teams, which has been a great enabling tool to improve a lot of our business process. And there's a lot there that of training that we need to do on some of the functionality, as some people have branched out and shown how we can use that to collaborate very effectively, not just internally, but externally as well.
Fantastic. So I think that is all we have for now. We also have just 2 minutes to go. So I would like to spend the rest of this time to thank everyone who took off time off their busy schedule to join us today, as well as say thank you to our expertise or our knowledgeable experts who are also joining us, Bo and Joe, as well as Sidi. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate this very much.